Thank you for joining us for this webinar titled Using Smarter Measure Data to Help Measure the Impact of Other Student Services. I'm joined today by my colleagues from Gateway Technical College, Michelle Borkart and Mary Zhang. Hi, I'm Dr. Mac Adkins, the founder and Chief Academic Officer here at Smarter Services. We're glad to provide this webinar to you today. At Smarter Services, we really try to be more than just a vendor. We want to bring you some value. And so periodically, usually about once a quarter, we have a webinar on some topic. Sometimes the topics are directly related to Smarter Measure, like how to improve your new student orientation. Sometimes they're tangentially related, like we recently did one about accreditation standards and how they relate to learner readiness. But recently I was on a call with Gateway Technical College, and they shared with me some of the research that they had been doing about measuring the effectiveness of their tutoring program, and they used Smarter Measure data to help control for variables like personality traits, situation and life factors, computing access, and technical competency. And being a data geek, having served as 3 years as a data analyst in a Department of Institutional Effectiveness, that topic really intrigued me. And so I asked Michelle and Mary if they'd be willing to share that with our other clients in a webinar. So I'm so glad today that they've decided to share that with you. What you're going to learn is one additional use of Smarter Measure data. That's great. You're also going to learn a model that you could use for evaluating student services at your institution. In this case, it's going to be Gateway talking about how they evaluated their tutoring program. So you're going to learn a little about their tutoring program, but what you're really going to get is this model of how you could evaluate the effectiveness of your first year experience program or your orientation course or whatever the student service is that you're providing. So truly excited about this topic today. Most of the people here are our clients. You know us, you love us. That's why you're here today. Welcome. But sometimes our clients invite others. Sometimes prospective clients join us. So if you're not as familiar with Smarter Services, we've been around for a long time. In educational technology, we've been around for 21 years, which is forever in this space. We've served over 1,000 institutions, proctored millions of exams, and administered Smarter Measure to over 6.5 million students. There's two services we provide. We're not here to sell you anything today, but if you'd like to buy something, please reach out to us afterwards. We do provide Smarter Measure that we'll be talking about in just a moment. We also provide Smarter Proctoring, which is a multimodal proctoring process management system. And one thing that's unique about it that a lot of schools are interested in these days is we have a new modality called hybrid virtual proctoring, which allows someone at your institution who's typically someone in your testing center who is trained as a proctor. It allows that person to use our software, the same software that our professional proctors use. It allows your test center employee to be the live virtual proctor. So it's really kind of a neat thing. It's someone at your institution doing the live proctoring. And so if you'd like to learn about that, reach out to us and we'll be glad to inform you. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to say just a little bit about Smarter Measure and the constructs that it measures. Then I'll be turning it over to Michelle and Mary. They're going to talk about their implementation plan, both of Smarter Measure as well as their tutoring program, so that you can understand what they're doing with both of those. Then they're going to talk about their quasi-experimental research design that they used to do this analysis. And then they're going to share the results of that analysis about tutoring. So looking forward to hearing what they say there. So we're going to start with a poll. We're kind of curious about the degree of comfort and familiarity that you guys have. So let me launch this poll. And I see that it's running now, so you should be seeing it. Tara, did you guys, yeah, there comes a response in. While you guys are completing that poll, I'm going to share with you a little bit of information. I think most everyone on the call knows this, but in case we have some visitors to the meeting, I want you to understand what Smarter Measure measures so that when you hear Michelle and Mary talk about how they're using that data, you'll understand what they're referring to. So the SmarterMeasure Learning Readiness Indicator measures several different scales. The first scale that it measures we call individual attributes. Those are things like motivation, control over procrastination, willingness to ask for help, locus of control, things that kind of define the learner's learning personality. We also identify their dominant learning preference. You may call that a learning style. We use the multiple intelligences model. So that's whether they're visual, verbal, social, solitary, those things. We also look at the learner externally. We call that one life factors. That's what's going on in their life. How much time do they have to study, support from family, support from employers, general health, finances. It's really an environmental scan of what's happening in their life. Then we look at a skill set. We look at their on-screen reading rate and recall, their technical competency, their experience with the learning management system. We look at their technical knowledge, such as vocabulary of technical terms, and then we measure their keyboarding rate and accuracy. So there's several skills that we measure. Also, SmarterMeasure has available some cognitive scales as well. We have a math readiness indicator and a writing readiness indicator. Both of these are not as diagnostic as prescriptive as, say, an AccuPlacer. They are not placement tests, but what they are is a brief 30-item instrument. They both pull from a pool of 90 items, so it really gives you that 30,000-foot view to help identify persons who may need a placement exam or some additional services. So that's what SmarterMeasure measures. Now let's look at our poll results. I'm going to say end the poll, and let's see if it allows me to present the results of it. So we've got 15% of our participants that are data ninjas. There is some content that they may or may not speak to today at the very end of this presentation about a particular process to do an SPSS. So that's going to be a special thing just for you ninjas. Most of us, 73%, like getting our feet wet with data, but we're still learning. If you're like many people, we like to consume data, but when it comes to creating it, that's a little different. About 13% there that like data when other people are involved. So that gives our speakers a little bit of background on your level of competency. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow Michelle to start sharing, and they'll take it from here.
My name is Michelle Borkhart. I'm the manager of research services, and we're actually going to start with Mary. So Mary, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks so much, Michelle. And thank you, Mac and Tara, for having us on. We've been with SmarterMeasure now since 2008. So we're really glad to be bringing our research to full combination to be able to support our students. Again, my name is Mary Zhang. I'm the Student Success Programming Coordinator for the Title III grant at Gateway Technical College. And so part of our implementation plan includes knowing our students. Thank you. So a little bit about Gateway Technical College is that we're located in Southeast Wisconsin in a tri-county area, Racine, Kenosha, and Walworth. We're a public two-year college. In 2022, we enrolled about over 7,000 students, almost 8,000 students. And many of our students are considered at risk because we are an open access college. This means that about 52% of our students are economically disadvantaged. We have about 18% who are single parents, and they're mostly part-time working adult students. We also have an estimated 40% housing insecurities and 31% food insecurities as well. So as you can see, SmarterMeasures really provides us with some sort of way to understand our students a little bit further. Now also, our year 1 to year 2 retention rate was 62%, and our third year graduation rate, which is about the average of when our students graduate, is about 45%. So one of the multi-pronged approaches that we wanted to provide in terms of the solution was that our retention enrollment rate was declining. And the only way that we felt that we could do this, along with Zena Haywood, who was our provost at the time, was to be able to provide a first-year seminar course, which this was our first ever course that we ever installed at the college ever. So with a team of experts, then Provost Zena Haywood guided us through the process to begin the assessment process and to really plan out what we would want to focus on. Well, knowing all that we knew about our students, that, they were probably not as academically prepared as we would like them to, we felt that a Gateway to Success course, or which is our first year seminar course, would help our students to explore the college a little bit further, and meaning resources and services, as well as think about their academic success. What skills do they need to identify in order to be able to achieve their educational and personal goals? So this is a mandatory 1-credit course. And I say that again, because I think that's what really helped to make our students successful with the Smarter Measures assessment, which really created a bigger sample of that. So as you can see, the way we were able to leverage Smarter Measures for retention was getting them earlier on, understanding where they were at earlier on. We had greater response rates. We were also able to assess their online readiness, which Smarter Measures does that for us successfully. And we were also able to assess the risk and develop referral systems. So by implanting it within the first year experience, many of our students took it as an assignment with a reflection, and within that reflection, instructors were able to kind of think about more like, what do we need to refer them to? How else can I help them? So as you can see here, we just went back to 2015, even though we've been with them since 2008. In 2015, you can see that our sample was really low. So meaning that the number of takers, it was really low. It's less than 500. And then you can see that in 2020, when we installed the Gateway to Success course, which is our first year seminar, you can see that it increased drastically, almost up to 1,500. At most we had in 2021 was a little bit over 2,000. So our sample here is pretty solid, considering that what we ended up doing was being able to, again, use that data to further assess, the impact of our services with our students. So a little bit about our tutoring at Gateway is that our tutoring services, and I want to do justice to this because we have some of our tutoring colleagues online. So and they do a great job, is that we do have, I think, about 4 to 5 learning success instructors. So these are professional instructors who come in, who oversee the tutoring centers and allow them to bring in their expertise with learning to say, how can we help our students learn and be tutored also in the best way possible? So they offer this tutoring both on site at all of our different campuses, our 3 main campuses, and also virtually via Zoom. They have appointments and they have a drop-in tutoring available. So we also have a system for that. Their general hours of operation always gets adjusted semester to semester and also based on demand. But it's usually Monday through Thursday, 9 to 7, and Fridays, 9 to 2. We, again, like I said, we have professional tutors and also peer tutors available. And then our average duration of session is actually about 1.6 hours per session. And the most common courses that students come in to ask for help with is English composition and our quantitative reasoning, which I know this is not the best term, I don't want to confuse anyone, but these are considered some of our gateway courses, meaning that they kind of hold students back from being able to access and move forward with their program courses. So those courses are pretty important and imperative for students to be able to move forward. All right, so tutoring at Gateway, their goal is that the first thing that they do, some of the best practices that they've instilled, is that they assess the student goals for the tutoring session, so that they're not just coming in and saying, hey, we're going to come in and we're going to jump in, we're just going to keep on learning what we're learning. They're going to want to assess, what is your goal as a student, and how can we help you reach that goal? They also assess the students' current skills, and then they scaffold the new skills using strategies. They also use empowerment strategies to learn and apply the new concepts, use of reciprocal questioning. They also use retrieval practice and feedback centered around the growth mindset language. The person doing the work is doing the learning. So it's not the tutors saying, hey, I'm just going to do it for you, which is easy to do, especially when you like someone, you're like, maybe I'll just help you a little bit and, we'll go through this one. And before you know it, you're at the end of the page, right? Continuous communication is also key between the tutors, the leadership, and the classroom instructors. And then also using the data to drive tutor hiring and hours of tutor offerings. So the length of hours, the time, and the subjects, as we talked about the quant reasoning and also English composition. And the majority of the tutors are content specialists, and they're not professional educators because of the current constraints. However, our we call them full-time faculty at our institution, are content specialists and also professional educators as well. So some of the great comments that our full-time faculty have shared with us is that the key to making an effective tutoring program great is that you always have to have the continuous communication. And of course, that retrieval practice and feedback around growth mindset language is pivotal for students and their learning. And now we're going to move on to Michelle, who's going to talk about the program evaluation and research side. So we're going to jump in and get our hands a little dirty, I guess. Thanks, Michelle.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary. So we're going to think back to that initial poll that we took earlier. We did see that there are a couple of people who are data ninjas, and then there are a couple of people who are like, the data is dark and full of terrors. So we wanted to get a gauge for our audience, because we are going to get a little deep into research design and methodology. And I know that can be confusing for some people. It can be scary, but I'm going to attempt to explain it in an approachable way that is understandable using kind of common day language. So hopefully this will make sense. I did see from the poll that most of you do like data, so that is really good. And I would imagine you like data if you're coming to a webinar like this. So, all right, so we're going to talk about how we leverage smarter measures for program evaluation. And we all know in higher education right now, resources are tight, both time resources, financial and staff resources. So program evaluation is really important to make sure that what we're doing as an institution is effective, that it makes sense, that if there's any areas where we can improve and use our data to enhance, that is always good. We need to assess both for accreditation, but really just to make sure that we are offering the best services possible to our students and we're seeing the most students succeed. So we're going to talk about this new methodology that we started using to evaluate. We started with the tutoring program, and we're hoping to expand that to other services as well. So our tutoring department approached us about evaluating whether their services are effective. And part of that, when you start any research project, you need to ask, what is our primary research question? How do we define whether tutoring is effective or not effective? So we thought the best way to define success would be your course pass rates or course completion rates. So for us, we're defining that as the percentage of students who passed the class with a grade of C or higher, as opposed to students who failed the class or withdrew from the class. So that's course completion or course pass rates. So that was one outcome we wanted to see. Ideally, tutoring should be improving the student's ability to pass the class. At the same time, we thought maybe this might have an impact on retention or graduation rates. We weren't sure if that might be the case, but thought we would look at that as well. Because if you're not passing your classes, you're not going to graduate. So we thought there could be, a relationship there. So now we have to decide, how are we going to answer these questions? How do we look at this? And there's a few options. So in research, the gold standard for identifying cause and effect is your experimental design. This is like the ideal situation. And so most people are familiar with this in terms of drug testing. You think you have your real drug, like the drug that's being tested, and then you have the placebo drug, which is like a sugar pill or whatever that might be. And everybody who participates in the clinical trial, it's almost like you flip a coin. It's random selection. You flip a coin. If it's heads, maybe they get the real drug. If it's tails, they get the placebo. And a lot of times, like, they won't know if they have the real drug or not. And then the doctor and the medical professionals also won't know which patient has the real drug or the placebo. And they do this so that you can't manipulate the results. They also do this so that the random selection component is to prevent any other characteristics about that person from impacting the results. So that's really important. That prevents what's called research bias when some characteristic might come in and impact the results. So unfortunately, we can't really do a true experiment when it comes to assessing tutoring because that would be highly unethical. We can't tell our students, like, randomly decide, oh, you get to use tutoring and you don't get to use tutoring. Or worse, like you get to use tutoring and then these students have to use the fake tutoring, but they don't know it's fake. So we can't do that. That's not okay. So the next option that you could do is comparing all the students who received tutoring with all of the students who did not receive tutoring. This would be a simple comparison, but really this isn't beneficial either because that's comparing apples to oranges. So the students that are choosing to use tutoring, usually there's something about them that is leading them to use tutoring versus other students who do not use tutoring. That could be perhaps a greater sense of self-initiative, greater sense of conscientiousness or responsibility. Maybe you're more willing to seek help. It could also be external factors. Maybe you have transportation and can physically get to the tutoring site. Or maybe you have more free time. You're not, you have time available to use tutoring versus if you were taking care of kids or having to go to work. So, because of these characteristics about the tutoring group, that could make them more likely to succeed regardless of whether or not they use tutoring. And so we cannot compare all of the tutoring students with all of the students who don't receive tutoring because there are these characteristics and we might not even know what those characteristics are. So what we really have to do is I call it finding the apples among the oranges. So when you have your group of students who don't use tutoring, if you can find a way to figure out, okay, what might these characteristics be about the Apple group, the tutoring group, and how do we identify a suitable comparison? And so this is where we get into the quasi-experimental design. And you find like whether you use demographic variables or we used the SmarterMeasures data, you have to find the people who are most similar from the non-tutoring group to compare. So there's another way you can look at this. So this is kind of simplifying everything into two dimensions, an XY axis. Maybe the Y axis is age, maybe the X axis is like your high school GPA or your SAT score, whatever that might be. And so we have the treatment group and the comparison group. So that's what the T and the C stands for. And you can see there's wide differences among these two groups with regards to the X and Y axis, whatever those are referring to. So that variability, it's hard to really compare the two. But what you do in quasi-experimental designs is you find these matched pairs. So the comparison group, the students who would be most similar in nature to your treatment group or the tutoring group. And you use this through different matching techniques. It's a way to find the quote unquote nearest neighbor. So that way, when you find the closest student who is the most similar based off of certain characteristics, then all of the other students who didn't receive tutoring who aren't similar, we wouldn't look at those. We'd be looking just at the ones within the circles, the ones who are most similar on these characteristics who either received tutoring, so they're in the treatment group, or they did not receive tutoring, so they're in the matched comparison group. So we chose to use the SmarterMeasures assessment as our matching variables. First, because of all of the scales that Mac mentioned at the very beginning. So when we talk about at-risk students and what might make them likely to succeed or not likely to succeed, these are a lot of the characteristics that we're talking about usually. Typically in my conversations with people, we're like, talking about study habits, procrastination, time management, We might also talk about life factors. Does the student have family support? Do they have friend support? Are they working a job? Do they have time? We also talk about computer access. That is a huge one with our student population, is not having access to technology. So we felt like the content area covered by Smarter Measures was highly useful for identifying our matched pairs. Additionally, there were benefits of feasibility, timing, and response rates. So these are some of the things that Mary talked about earlier. So as far as feasibility, Smarter Measures has this great online platform that you can just download, export the data, and it gives you all the scales ready to go. And so that was really useful for us. We, as a college, if you're familiar with Data Talk, we don't yet have a data warehouse that's been fully implemented. We're actually in the process of setting one up, which is very exciting. But until that is fully implemented, we have a lot of data silos, and that might sound familiar to you. There's a lot of data in higher ed, but you might not have easy access to it. So the Smarter Measures data was very easy for us to get, so it was very feasible. Additionally, the timing was a consideration. When you're doing this kind of assessment, whatever characteristics or variables that you're using to find those matched pairs, ideally that data is collected before the intervention, because the intervention could hypothetically affect the matching data. So because Smarter Measures is done during that first year experience, the timing was perfect because they're completing it at the very beginning of their time at Gateway, and that gives you that good baseline to find your matched comparison group. Additionally, Mary mentioned the response rates. We get a high number of respondents each year, which gives us a very large sample from which you're more likely to find your matching students. The more data you have available, the higher your sample size, and therefore the more powerful your results. So for our assessment, we did not include demographic information in our matching, but you could. A lot of people will use demographic information. I will mention if you're using this method to evaluate a program or a service that includes demographic information as an eligibility requirement, such as here we talk about women in STEM, or if you have a Black male initiative, or something similar, you would want to include those variables in the matching criteria. So if you're evaluating a program's effectiveness for women in STEM, then your comparison group should also be women in STEM. So that's just one caveat with how you may or may not implement a method like this. All right, so that is the big picture overview, the theory behind how this works. And now I'm going to talk even a little more practical. Now we're going to get even a little more into the nitty gritty data stuff. Again, I nerd out. I could talk forever. So hopefully you enjoy this as much as I do. So step by step, there's kind of 3 steps in this process. First, prepare the data. So you have to gather all of the data from your different data sources and put it into one big data set or spreadsheet. Then you have to run it through the matching method. So we used SPSS, case control matching. SPSS is a statistics software if you're not familiar. Other people might use R, or they might use other softwares. We do have at the very end of the slide deck, we're not going to go through it, but if you use SPSS, we have screenshots that with detailed instructions that walk you through it. So when they send the slide deck following the presentation, you can get access to that. So you get your data, you find your matched comparison group, and then once you have that, you can actually compare the outcomes for students who use tutoring versus the matched group that did not use tutoring. So for preparing the data, we had 3 different data sources. So first we had to gather all of our student data, which is basically everybody who was enrolled within the time frame. We looked at a 3-year time frame, and that's where you're usually pulling in your outcome data as well. So those course completion rates, retention, and graduation rates. So once you have that, then you add in your tutoring data. So which of all of the students use tutoring? And then you're also adding in your Smarter Measures data because that's your scales. That's what you use to find your matching comparison groups. So we had 3 different spreadsheets that we had to mash into one big spreadsheet. I used VLOOKUPs because they're fun. Not everybody likes VLOOKUPs. You could also do this in R or in SPSS, but we matched everybody based off of student ID. That's one thing. We had added student ID, I think, as a custom question. I'm not sure if everybody has that automatically in Smarter Measures or not. Tara's shaking her head no. So to do this, you would need some method to match the Smarter Measures data to your other student data. So for us, that was student ID. So once you have your big data set, then that's when you load it into SPSS, which is the software we used, or you can use your software of choice. And you have to break it out into 3 groups. So you have your intervention group, which is the students who received tutoring, your comparison group, that's the matched students who did not use tutoring. And then you'll have a few students left over who did not use tutoring, but also were not matching. So again, if we remember, this is all the students who received tutoring, all the students who didn't receive tutoring, and then you would have your 3 groups here. So your tutoring group, your comparison group, and the unmatched students. So the unmatched students are going to be left to the side, and then your analysis, you will be conducting it on the intervention group and the matched comparison group. Okay, so deep breaths. We got through all of the hard, confusing research data stuff. Now we're going to talk about the results, which is the really exciting part. So first, we have a series of some graphs for you. This first graph looks at the course completion rates for our tutoring group and our matched comparison group. So the bar on the left is the matched comparison group, those who received no tutoring. And the bar on the right is those who received tutoring. And this refers to their first year at Gateway. So we see that the students who received tutoring had a 6 percentage point higher course completion rate compared to those who did not receive tutoring. So this shows positive benefit of tutoring for these students. Now the difference is small. So there's another way you can look at this. You can look at pre and post data. So this next slide does show the blue line is the intervention group. So that's the students who received tutoring. The orange line is the group of students, the matched comparison group who did not receive tutoring. This is where in year 1, that's before tutoring. So I pulled out all the students who did not receive any tutoring year 1, including the blue line, no tutoring year 1. And we see that their completion rates are pretty similar. There's slight differences, but they're fairly similar, which is, that does tell us our matching characteristics are pretty good there. But what we see in year 2 is a pretty drastic change. So once we introduced tutoring the second year for the intervention group, they had an 8.2 percentage point increase compared to the students who did not receive tutoring, had an 8.7 percentage point decline in course completion rates. So this is a pretty drastic difference. This also demonstrates the value of having the comparison group, because we could have done a very simple tutoring assessment that just included the blue line, and we would have thought, oh yeah, we see positive results, like it's a small difference, but it's pretty good. But now that we add in the comparison group, we're like, oh, like this is actually really good, because the gap between the two is it's close to 20 percentage points difference. So this is really demonstrating like tutoring is a highly valuable, essential service for students that's helping them get through their coursework. You can also look at this data on a course level. So this, Mary mentioned, we have the English Composition 1, which is like our English 101 gateway course, and we have the Quantitative Reasoning, which is the math course. So this shows students who received tutoring for English Composition 1 had significantly higher completion rates. They were much more likely to pass the class, which is very exciting. The difference is very dramatic here. So we loved seeing this. Both of these 2 classes, the English Comp 1 and the Quantitative Reasoning, which is I'm going to show next, these are high enrollment classes, but they're also high fail classes, unfortunately. So they're high enrollment because it's required for pretty much every academic program at Gateway. But they're really challenging content for a lot of our students. We have a lot of underprepared, academically disadvantaged students coming through. And so when we see results like this, like we're really excited. Like this makes me want to tell all of our English Comp 1 students, you have to go to tutoring, like just do it. It's worth it. So now I'm going to show the math results. So we notice the math results don't look quite the same. The increase is a lot smaller. There is still an increase. So we are still very happy that there is an increase. So I think the main difference between these two probably relates to how the learning outcomes are assessed for English composition versus math. With an English writing class, you think they write their paper, they take it to tutoring, they get help, making sure the paper's good, and then that's the final product they turn in, as opposed to math where you have to actually like learn and be able to reproduce it on your own. So we think that's probably part of the difference between the level of increase. The other thing, this is a great example of how you can use this data to identify opportunities to improve and to enhance. So when we see this, we are very excited and happy that there is a 4 percentage point increase, but we would also love to see that be like a greater increase. So that is where we can, brainstorm, the tutoring team can brainstorm, how can we continue to improve the math tutoring? And then maybe 2 years down the road, we redo this assessment and see if there was any increase or greater increase. So now we're going to look at retention and graduation rates. So what we found, the tutoring group did have slightly higher retention rates, but this result was not statistically significant. So statistics, it's all probabilities, right? So the probability, we didn't reach the level that you need to say that this is the result of tutoring. So it was not statistically significant, which means it could be a result of chance. It could be the result of, other characteristics or factors not mentioned here. So, and it could also just be that the sample size was too small to gauge the statistical significance. So this is something we might want to look at in the future with a larger sample. We saw very similar with third year graduation rates. There was a slight increase, but again, it was not statistically significant. All of that to say, overall, we were very excited about the results. So the retention and graduation rates, we would say that's inconclusive, but we can say that the assessment demonstrated the positive impact of tutoring on course completion rates, especially for English Composition 1, but also for quantitative reasoning. And so that's something we're really excited about that we can continue building upon in the future. All right, so we're going to go brief next steps, and then we'll get into the questions and answers. So for institutional research, which that's the department I work in, we are very excited to be currently in the implementation phase of our data warehouse, which if you're not familiar with the data warehouse, it is a software that allows you to bring in data from all of these different sources, from your student information system, your learning management system, from SmarterMeasures, all in one place so that there's no more data silos, and it would make life just so much easier. So we're really excited and can't wait for that to be fully implemented. And then we are also working on trying to do the same type of assessment for other activities at Gateway. So our new student orientation and academic advising are not currently required. So we want to evaluate students who use those versus students who don't, if there's any benefit. We also have like a mentoring program, multicultural support services, promise program. Really, there's so many different ways that you could assess your data. Like this method is really, it's pretty broad what you can do with it, which is really exciting. We also recognize most students use more than one service. They're not just using tutoring. And so a regression analysis is a different kind of statistics that allows you to look at the impact of multiple services. So what we described here, the case control assessment, it's just looking at one intervention at a time. Regression analysis would allow us to plug in all of these different things and see which ones are having the most impact and to what degree and what direction are they improving. Hopefully none of them are hindering, but that's what a regression analysis could tell us, and that's one of our future goals. Once we have the data warehouse, that'll be a lot easier to do. And then Mary's going to talk about some of our other retention goals.
Right. So a few other aspects in terms of retention is that we're hoping that we can have an earlier risk assessment. So right now we are placing it in our Gateway to Success course, which is showing that it is very successful in terms of our completion rates, which is pivotal, right, in terms of being able to use this data to support and help our students. So that earlier risk assessment, if it could happen, earlier in the onboarding process, that would be very helpful. Also automated service referrals, so that it's not just, by person connection alone, but automating it through maybe our advice system, or maybe automating it through our Lucian system somehow, so that it can automatically just send an email to a student or contact or support system person to that student right away. And also looking into integrating into advising and support processes. So right now we have an implementation team that we put together to kind of decide, where can we create this process so that this output, this report that we're receiving from our students, now that we have this information, how can we utilize it to further initiate the support instead of it becoming a reactionary support. Many times when we look at risk, we often look at it as a symptom of something. Here we can combine the non-cognitive with the cognitive, meaning we can see what's happening outside of their home or outside of the classroom earlier than later, and being able to prod them and support them along to the right services earlier than later. So those processes are something that we're really excited about, to be able to, again, work seamlessly together and not in silos. All right, so now we're open for questions and answers. So Tara, if you want to take that on and help us with that.
I'm actually going to start. I see one question in the chat, so I'm going to start with that. So Carrie had asked if this looked at any amount of tutoring, or was there a number of visits required to be included in the treatment group? So for our treatment group, we included any amount of tutoring. So that is, one thing that we could look at differently to see, does it matter how much tutoring you're having? Most students are coming in for a fair amount of time. So if you remember at the very beginning, the average tutoring session was 1.6 hours. We did also, with the retention rate, so we found that there was no impact on retention, second year retention for the tutoring group. But I didn't include the slide, but I had actually looked at 5 hours plus of tutoring. So students who received 5 hours of tutoring or more, they actually did have a positive impact on retention. And I thought maybe that's related to developing that relationship with the tutoring staff, because we know that engagement and having that relationship is really important. And Carrie's mimicking some of that 3 or more tutoring sessions is really important. That seems to be, 3 to 5 seems to be the sweet spot. So yeah, a lot of that resonates with a lot of people.
Thank you for answering that question. Michelle, I put in the chat, if anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll field them live with the remainder of the time.
So Michelle or Mary, one of the attendees had asked, how you collect your data about your tutoring services, and one of your colleagues answered that TutorTrack is the service you use for that. In case some of the attendees are not as familiar with TutorTrack, would you like to tell us a little bit about what that service does?
So that's when I wish Gary Flynn was. He's our Dean of Learning Success. He's the one, yeah. So TutorTrack, I think it's just a software that students use to log in when they're coming in. And so they log in and they write what course they're coming for as well. And so that was really useful for us to do some of that specific analysis for English Comp 1. I think it maybe gives them some analytics about, let's see, Gary said sign in, sign out. They can manually enter and update usage. So if there's like a power outage and you have to revert back to paper, or, if you have to use paper for logging people in, then you can enter it after the fact. I'm not sure I think it might have some analytics as well. So scheduling function, you can make appointments, log in and out, and you can run reports on usage. So it's really just what they use for tutoring, for tracking it. And that's, I think, where they exported the data and they sent that to me. So I got the spreadsheet and was able to run it through. See, the analytics are a little slim.
Sounds like you were able to
yeah.
frequency and duration from that. That's good. While others may be thinking of some questions and maybe typing those into chat or Q&A, just let me reflect a little bit. I've worked in a Department of Institutional Effectiveness for 3 years as a data analyst earlier in my career. So Michelle, I geek out about this stuff like you do. But while we love, doing all this with the data, I was always frustrated in that role because we'd spend hours and hours and days preparing these reports, and we'd present them to the Chancellor Cabinet or a set of deans or whomever. And so many times that data would be heard, but then the decisions would seem to be made politically or some other motivation, right? And so that was kind of discouraging that we had this evidence-based research to validate something that we're doing, like tutoring and the impact that makes on course completion. And so we need to really promote our tutoring services or whatever. So I just speak a little bit about the degree to which you feel that at Gateway Tech, the collection and the making these findings, of making your colleagues aware of that, has that impacted at all how you promote your tutoring services or the level of usage, or maybe it's too early to answer that question, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I know that we only just conducted this assessment this spring, so the results are still pretty new. So I'm not sure. We have shared it obviously with our Dean of Learning Success and some of the tutors there, and I believe Gary shared that out with his whole department as well. And we have a research brief. So every time we do research in our office, we're trying to create a 1 to 2 page research brief that is written in plain language that people can understand. And that helps get the information out to college leaders and stakeholders to make it usable for them. So similar to your experiences, that's always the challenge. We may have a lot of data, but then taking it that next step and actually using it, part of it is helping people be aware of the data. So our research department, we just created about maybe 18 months ago, we just created a publications page on our intranet site where we have all of our research available. We have those research briefs, we have formal reports. And so our staff can access those anytime. We're also trying to hold, we call them data dives, where people can come, kind of like a webinar format. So people within the college can come and learn about the research that we're doing. And we are seeing more engagement with the research, which is really exciting. I remember when I first started working here, first of all, I think very few people knew that I was here. And I think the state of things maybe was a little like the data is dark and full of terrors. But now that we're working on getting that data out to people more, we are now starting to have people come to us and asking for assessment, asking for research. That is really exciting. So we are making improvement and progress in being a data-informed college. And yeah, I was really excited because Gary actually approached me to do this research on the tutoring department. So we were really grateful for that. Let's see.
Can I just add too that one of the things that Michelle and Sean have done really well too is helping us to understand what we're looking for when we're looking for data, because I think that's a big, I think that's a lot of the confusion around what is it that we want to learn. It's like we love data, but what is it that we really want to do with it, and what do we want to learn? I think Michelle does a really good job with sitting us back and asking us those hard questions of, what do you want to use it for? Where are we trying to go with this? Because that way it can influence, I think, Michelle's strategy, and also understand, what kind of questions that she needs to answer for her own processing for data too. So in terms of that actionable data, essentially what you're talking about, Mac, is Michelle and Sean have been really helpful with it. And every time I work with Michelle, she's always like, and here are some things that it could help you with. So think about X, Y, and Z, which is great, because sometimes, again, we can have this data, but what does it mean to us as a person who maybe is coming in and working on the service end of it? So that is a really great, I think, collaboration between IR and also our services to understand our impact, and also where we want to go as knowledge seekers versus just, gauging information, but not knowing what to do with it.
Great. I've had a couple of other questions come in. Sydney asked, what characteristics did you find most relevant to help you determine the treatment and control groups?
So that's where we felt that the Smarter Measures data was really useful. So we used 4 scales. We excluded a couple of the scales. So the scales that we included were the individual attributes, which has to do with some of those personality factors and maybe your control over procrastination, your likelihood to seek help. We also included the life factors. So what's going on in your life, and we use the technical competency and technical knowledge, which have to do with your access to and ability to use a computer. For us, that just seemed to make sense because those are typically what we talk about when we're talking about student barriers and challenges that our students are facing, since we do have a lot of at-risk students. We could theoretically use demographic information, but we have not run our own prediction model yet as far as demographics. So we're still a little, we would need to know which specific demographics are the most important in order to include those in the analysis. We did not include the reading scale from Smarter Measures because some students might skip the reading portion if they're not really fully engaged when they're taking the assessment. So we chose not to include that one. I'm trying to remember the learning styles. We chose not to include that one because I generally don't like to think someone's learning style is like a predictor of success or not. So we excluded that one as well. But so really those personal attributes, your life factors, and your technical access and knowledge, those were the ones that were really important to us.
So Michelle, as you guys are continuing to do this longitudinally, one thing to keep in mind is that with demographic factors, they're not malleable. You get what you've got, right? But with
Right.
non-cognitive factors, control over procrastination or technical skills, those things may be dynamic, and students may actually see improvement over time as a result of some of your services.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do
Let's
have another
see.
question. Brenda, I think you guys can read it there regarding TOEFL.
Yeah, so the students who don't speak English as a first language, so she's asking like, how do we identify those students, if I'm reading this right? Um, that's a hard one because we don't necessarily ask our program students that either. And I've actually been working with a few colleagues on trying to identify needs for English language learners. So one way that we are approaching it, we do teach a lot of ESL classes at Gateway. And so if a student is enrolled in an ESL class, they are flagged as an English language learner. So that is one way we identify those students. However, once they're no longer enrolled in ESL courses, like if they complete the progression and then they move into like the nursing program or whatever program, they're no longer flagged as English language learners. So that is a challenge. So I was trying to finagle the data the best I can before our data warehouse. Once we get the data warehouse, everything, all of our problems will be solved, proverbially. But it's really hard. If you're not asking it, and then when you ask those questions, you also have to be careful about like immigration status and things like that. So that's a hard one. It's a hard one, but because of our ESL coursework, we're using that kind of as a way to trigger, but that's not going to capture everyone.
Michelle Wiley from Penn State. Hi, Michelle. Gave some feedback on the question. She said you could add a custom question to Smarter Measure and ask students if English is their primary language. Yes, no, prefer not to answer. That's a capability that we have in our engine that you can ask any question.
Absolutely.
So if you would like to track that. And that's a very timely question because I was speaking to another client about that actually on Monday, about students who aren't scoring very well in the reading section specifically of Smarter Measure. And how do you know if it's because English wasn't their primary language or they just didn't read it and therefore they didn't do well, and how can you make meaning of that data? So that's a very timely question, Brenda. And thank you, Michelle, for your comment. And then Vicki said that their writing center asks about home primary language when students schedule an appointment with the writing center. Thank you for that feedback, Vicki. All right.
And I would
Okay.
think a positive way to ask that ESL question as one of the custom questions at the beginning of Smarter Measure could be just state it, if English is not your first language, please state what is your primary language. That way you're collecting another data point and you're maybe not making that person feel like, are you ESL or not, yes or no, and feel like they're disadvantaged if they, check no or that kind of thing. So.
Definitely. And that's also, we've had colleagues who have not just wondered if someone is an English language learner, but also like, what is their native language specifically? Like, is it Spanish? Is it Chinese or Mandarin? Like, where are they coming from? So that
Mhm.
would be a great way to phrase it.
Okay, so I think we're nearing the top of the hour. Thank you to everyone for this dialogue today. You will receive a couple of emails from us containing a link to the survey. We'd love to know what you thought about this webinar today. I think you can see why I was so excited about this topic, because you guys know me, I just love Smarter Measure data. I think it's so meaningful to help students individually to understand their learning of their level of readiness. But after we've done that, after we've served the students individually, when you can use this data collectively to help you in some other way, like to control for extraneous variables and have an appropriate match set as you're evaluating your tutoring, that just makes my day, right? I feel like we're providing a service that's useful beyond its primary use. So just want to compliment our colleagues, Mary and Michelle, as well as several of their colleagues that joined us today from Gateway Technical College. We're glad you're here today. This webinar will be archived along with all of our webinars. If you go to smarterservices.com/webinar, or maybe webinars, I'm not sure if it's plural, but you'll see it there, and you can just scroll through all of our past webinars, and there may be some topics of interest to you there. So thank you for your time today. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. I hope it's not as hot for you as it is for those of us that were in Montgomery and Texas. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.